It's a bright, clear day when I decide to go on a solo camping trip deep in the woods. I've been feeling the need to get away, clear my mind, and be surrounded by nature for a while now. Nothing fancy, just a weekend hike, set up my tent, and enjoy the quiet. There's something soothing about the woods, something that makes me feel small in a way that reminds me how much there is out there in the world that I'll never fully understand. I head out early in the morning, knowing that I'll need to pack light but still make sure I have everything I need. Food, water, a first aid kit, and a basic tent. I keep it simple, not wanting to overcomplicate things. The trail I've chosen is fairly remote. I've hiked it before, but it's been a while. A couple of years, actually. My memory of it is a little hazy, but that's part of why I wanted to revisit it. There's a sense of adventure in not knowing exactly what to expect. The woods are dense here, trees towering over the trail in thick rows, casting long shadows even in the middle of the day. The sun is bright at first, filtering through the trees in beams of golden light, but as I venture deeper, the shade grows thicker. The air feels cooler, more humid, the smell of damp earth and pine needles filling my nose. The trail is narrow, winding around roots and rocks that make me watch my step. I walk slowly at first, taking in the sounds of the forest. Birds call out overhead, and the wind rustles through the leaves. Every so often, I hear the distant sound of a stream, but I can't quite tell where it's coming from. I'm not in any particular rush. The plan is to hike for about 3 or 4 hours, find a good spot, and set up camp. I've been out here enough times to know that if I push myself too hard, the last part of the hike becomes exhausting. So I pace myself. The forest feels familiar, but there's something off about it today. It's hard to put my finger on it. Maybe it's the way the air feels thicker than usual, or the fact that the trail seems less traveled. There's no sign of recent footprints, no markers on the trees. It's as if no one has been out here in a long time. Still, I push the thought aside. It's just a feeling. It's probably nothing. As I continue deeper into the woods, the trail begins to fade. The trees grow taller, the underbrush thicker. I can tell the way forward is becoming less clear, but I'm not worried. I've got a good sense of direction and I've mapped the area before. Plus, I'm prepared. I've got a compass and I've been practicing with it the past few months. I don't mind a little off-trail exploration. In fact, it feels kind of exciting, like I'm really in the wild, away from everything. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows over the trail. The temperature has dropped too, and I feel a slight chill in the air. I glance around, taking in the vastness of the forest. There's no sound of human activity, no distant voices, no cars, no machinery. It's all just trees and birds and wind. Eventually, I find a small clearing and decide this will be my spot. It's just big enough to set up my tent, and there's a large fallen log nearby that will be perfect for sitting. The ground is soft but not too damp, and there's a small stream running through one corner of the clearing. I could hear it faintly when I arrived, but now that I'm here, the sound is louder. The water moves quickly over the rocks, and I take a moment to watch it. It's peaceful, soothing. I decide to take a break before setting up camp. I sit on the log for a while, drinking some water and just soaking in the atmosphere. There's no rush. The sun is still setting, casting everything in a soft orange glow. The woods are quiet now, except for the sound of the stream and the occasional rustle of leaves. Feels like the world has slowed down. I close my eyes for a moment and just breathe in the fresh, cool air. That's when I hear it. At first, it's so faint that I think I might be imagining it. But then, there it is again. A crack, like something heavy breaking a twig. It's coming from the trees beyond the clearing, far enough that I can't see anything, but close enough that it feels real. My heart skips a beat, and I freeze, listening carefully. The air feels heavy, still. The noise stops as quickly as it started, and I'm left with the sound of the stream and my own breathing. I tell myself it's nothing, probably a deer or some other animal moving through the woods. Maybe it's just a branch falling from one of the trees. But something about the way it stopped so suddenly doesn't sit right with me. I get up from the log, my instincts telling me to stay alert. I gather my things and start setting up the tent, but my mind keeps wandering back to that noise. I keep glancing around the clearing, expecting to see something moving in the shadows, but everything is still. The trees sway gently in the breeze, but that's the only movement. The sound of the stream fills the air, and the light from the setting sun casts long, eerie shadows across the ground. By the time I finish setting up the tent, the sun has almost disappeared completely. The sky is dark now, and the temperature has dropped significantly. I make a small fire, sitting close to it for warmth. The crackling of the flames is the only sound now. The wind picks up slightly, rustling the leaves and making the trees creak. I try to shake off the feeling of unease, but it lingers in the back of my mind. The woods feel different tonight. They feel wrong somehow, but I can't put my finger on why. The hours drag on, the fire slowly burning down to embers. I add more wood, but it doesn't seem to burn as brightly as before. I'm starting to feel tired now, my eyes heavy from the day's hike. I wrap myself in my sleeping bag, lying on the ground next to the fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across the trees, and the sounds of the woods feel distant, muted. The stream still gurgles quietly in the background. I close my eyes, trying to sleep, but the noise comes again. It's louder this time, closer. The sound of something breaking through the underbrush. It's unmistakable now. My heart starts to race, and I sit up, straining my ears. The fire crackles softly, but everything else is silent. The trees are still, the air thick with tension. I grab my flashlight from the side of the tent and point it toward the source of the noise. The beam of light cuts through the dark, but there's nothing there. Nothing but the trees. Still, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. That someone or something is out there, just beyond the edge of the light. I hold my breath, listening. The sound is gone now, but the tension is still there, thick and oppressive. My eyes dart around, unable to focus on anything specific. I'm not sure how much time passes. Could be minutes, maybe hours. It feels like the night is stretching on forever. Then I hear it again, a twig snapping. It's much closer this time, just on the other side of the clearing. My stomach churns, and I instinctively reach for the knife I keep on my belt. I don't know why. It's not like I'm expecting to fight off some wild animal. But there's something about the way the night feels that makes me feel like I need to be ready. I don't move. I just sit there, tense, listening. The forest is silent again, but the feeling of being watched is unbearable. I can't take it anymore. I grab my stuff quickly, stuffing it all into the bag, and make a decision. I'm leaving. I don't know what's out there, but I can't stay here any longer. I pack up as quietly as I can, my movements quick and hurried. I grab the flashlight and shine it around one last time, but I don't see anything. Nothing but the trees, the rocks, the dark, empty space. It's like the forest is holding its breath, waiting for something. I don't look back as I leave the clearing. My heart is pounding in my chest, and my mind races with thoughts of what could be out there. I don't know why, but I feel like I'm being followed. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch sends my heart into my throat. The darkness seems to press in on me from all sides. I keep moving, forcing myself to walk faster, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the trees. I'm not sure how long I've been walking, but eventually, I start to recognize parts of the trail. The familiar rocks, the bend in the path. I'm getting closer to where I started. I don't stop until I reach the car. My hands are shaking as I open the door, and I don't even bother to check if the keys are in my pocket before I start the engine. I drive away without looking back, the tension slowly leaving my body with every mile. It's not until I'm on the main road, miles away from the woods, that I realize just how bad the situation could have been. There's no way to explain it, no logical reason why I felt so terrified. But something was off, and I'm not sure what. I don't know if it was my imagination, or if there really was something in the woods that night. But I do know one thing for sure. I won't be going back there again. I don't know why I chose to go camping alone that weekend. Maybe it was the draw of solitude, the peace of being deep in the woods where the air was fresh, and the sounds of civilization faded into the distance. I had no real plan, just a vague idea to spend a couple of nights away from everything. I was tired of the usual hustle, the noise, and the constant distractions. I needed space, and the woods offered just that. The trailhead was at the edge of the forest, marked only by a faded sign and the faintest trail visible in the underbrush. I grabbed my backpack, checked my gear, and made sure my phone had enough charge in case I needed to call for help. Although I wasn't expecting any trouble, it was always better to be safe. My food was packed, my tent was lightweight, and I had my trusty pocket knife just in case. The forest was peaceful at first, with only the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant sound of birds. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. It was strange how the noise of the outside world seemed to disappear the further I hiked in. The trees loomed tall around me, their thick branches stretching high above, creating a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. A cool breeze made the leaves sway, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm mixed with something else. A slight unease I couldn't quite place. I reached a small clearing just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. It seemed like the perfect spot to set up camp. The ground was level, the trees provided enough coverage to shield me from the wind, and there was a small stream nearby that I could use for water. I set up my tent quickly, glad that I had gotten an early start. As night fell, I built a small fire and sat near it, the crackling flames providing warmth and a sense of security. The woods around me were pitch dark, the kind of darkness that swallows sound and makes everything feel unknown. I could hear the stream trickling in the background, the occasional call of an owl, but other than that, it was silent. Too silent. No squirrels, no other wildlife, nothing but the occasional breeze that stirred the trees. I didn't think much of it at first. The deep woods were always quiet at night, right? It was just that eerie calm, something that seemed to make everything feel still, even unnatural. I tried to push the feeling aside and focus on the fire, but it wasn't long before I heard something else. A twig snapping in the distance. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't the wind. This was something else. It wasn't an animal either. It sounded too deliberate, too human. But that didn't make sense. I was miles from the nearest road, and I hadn't seen another person since I'd started hiking. My hand instinctively reached for the knife at my side, though I told myself it was probably nothing. Just an animal, I thought, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the sound came again, this time closer. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I scanned the shadows beyond the light of the fire, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was that had caused that noise. The forest was still, but it felt like there was something just beyond the edge of my vision, something watching. I stayed still, trying not to make any noise, waiting for whatever it was to reveal itself. The silence stretched on. The only sound was the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind shifted. But then another snap. This time, it was much closer, just beyond the clearing, almost as if something was circling me. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the noise, my heart hammering in my chest. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and underbrush. There was no sign of any animals, no movement in the shadows. I slowly lowered the flashlight, my mind racing. What the hell was that? My thoughts spun out of control. Was someone out there? But who would be out here in the middle of nowhere? And why hadn't I heard them before? I stood up, my legs shaky, and moved closer to the fire, my eyes darting around the clearing. The night felt thick and oppressive, like the air itself was heavier than usual. My stomach twisted into knots as I tried to make sense of the situation. I had come out here to escape, to find peace, but now I was starting to feel the weight of something far less inviting. The rustling started again, this time coming from the opposite side of the clearing. My heart leaped into my throat, and I grabbed my backpack, ready to bolt. But then, just as quickly as it started, the sound stopped. Complete silence followed. I didn't know what to do. It was possible I was just imagining things, my mind playing tricks on me in the quiet, but something told me it wasn't that simple. I decided to stay by the fire, knowing that the light and warmth would offer some sense of safety. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was like something was just out of sight, just out of reach, waiting for me to slip up. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, constantly checking the darkness around me, my grip tight on the knife at my side. Every little noise seemed to make my heart race. The fire flickered, and shadows danced in the trees. Time passed slowly, too slowly. Eventually, exhaustion set in, and I finally drifted into a restless sleep, my mind still on edge, my senses heightened. But I wasn't destined to sleep long. I awoke to a sharp crack of a branch snapping. This time it was loud, too loud to ignore. My eyes shot open and I was instantly alert. The fire had burned down to embers, and the forest was nearly pitch black once again. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the trees. I could feel my pulse quickening, the fear creeping back into my chest. I reached for the flashlight again and flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness and I scanned the area. Nothing. I slowly stood up, my legs stiff and heavy. I had to figure out what was going on. I wasn't going to spend another night like this, trapped in fear and uncertainty. Grabbing my knife again, I moved cautiously toward the edge of the clearing, scanning the woods around me. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, had me on edge. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but it felt like something was following me. The next few hours passed in a blur. I kept checking my surroundings, always thinking I could see something in the shadows, something just barely out of view. My mind began to play tricks on me. Was I hearing things, or was something truly out there? At some point, I heard a faint sound, something muffled, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. I couldn't make it out, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up even more. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rest of the night was a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the leaves seemed to heighten my fear. I had no idea what was out there, but I felt like I was in danger. I wasn't sure how long I could take it anymore. Finally, just before dawn, I packed up my things and left the campsite behind, moving as quickly as I could. The sense of unease didn't let up until I was back at the trailhead, where I could see the familiar signs of civilization. It wasn't until I got home that I could truly relax. I didn't speak much about the trip, keeping it to myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been out there, it was waiting for me. Maybe it was a trick of my mind, but the woods weren't as peaceful as they seemed. Something else was out there, and it was waiting for anyone who wandered too far into its domain. I've always been drawn to the woods. The deeper, the better. Maybe it's the isolation or the quiet that envelopes you like a heavy blanket, muting everything else. I remember the first time I went camping alone. I thought I'd be able to enjoy the solitude, to disconnect, to find something out there. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I figured I'd find it if I was far enough away from people, from distractions. I made my way into a remote patch of forest, an area a little off the beaten path where few people went. It wasn't well known, at least not to most people, but I had heard whispers about it from some locals. Nothing specific, just stories of odd happenings, things people didn't want to talk about too much. But those kinds of stories only intrigued me more, the sort of things that pushed the boundaries of normal. I figured that was just part of the charm. I spent the better part of the afternoon setting up my camp. I wasn't in any hurry. The weather was perfect, and the trees stood tall and still, casting long, slanting shadows across the ground. I was well prepared: tent, sleeping bag, food and water, everything I'd need to be out here for a few days. The light in the forest shifted as I worked, the sun creeping lower in the sky. As I finished securing my tent and gathering some firewood, the wind started picking up. Not much, but just enough to get the trees to whisper. I wasn't concerned, though. The forest had its own language, I thought. It was nothing more than the usual ebb and flow. But even then, a small knot of unease started to form in my stomach. I sat by the fire that night, staring into the flickering flames as the shadows danced around me. The crackle of the fire was the only sound, the kind of stillness that makes you realize how loud everything else in life really is. It's the kind of quiet that feels almost unnatural, and though I wanted to relish it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. I dismissed it as nerves, the kind that come from being alone in the woods after dark. The deeper parts of the forest always have a way of making you feel small. That night, as I crawled into my tent, I felt a chill settle over me. I zipped up the door, securing myself inside. The warmth from the fire was still lingering in the air, but it wasn't enough to fight off the cold that had suddenly crept in. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the occasional rustling of leaves outside, but each time the wind stirred the branches, it sounded like footsteps. I must have drifted to sleep, but something woke me in the middle of the night. It wasn't a sound or a sensation, but just a strange feeling, like someone or something was close. I opened my eyes, staring into the darkness of the tent. The air felt heavier now, as if the forest had suddenly taken on a more oppressive tone. My breath quickened, and I lay perfectly still, waiting for whatever it was to make its move. It never did, but I didn't sleep much after that. The night stretched on, too long and too still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest wasn't as peaceful as it had seemed earlier. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of relief, but also with a deep-rooted confusion. I had tried to rationalize my unease. Perhaps I was just exhausted from the hike. Maybe it was the unfamiliar sounds of the night. But as I packed up my things, something felt off. I wasn't sure when it started, but over the next few hours, I noticed it more and more. The woods were quieter than usual. There was no bird song, no rustling of small animals through the underbrush, just silence. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, making every small movement feel loud. My mind kept returning to the feeling of being watched, but I didn't want to entertain it. Still, I felt it. I decided to move further into the woods, hoping that I would find something to settle my nerves. I knew from experience that getting closer to nature's heart often meant finding peace, even if it was temporary. So, I kept walking, pushing myself deeper into the unknown. The trail I followed soon disappeared under the thick layer of leaves and moss, and I was left navigating through the dense undergrowth on my own. The deeper I went, the more I felt the forest shift. The trees seemed older here, their trunks gnarled and twisted in odd shapes. The air was thick, almost stifling, and the wind had died down completely. Everything felt still, almost too still. I had to push through the underbrush, thick vines grabbing at my clothes, and the further I ventured, the more I realized how isolated I truly was. By the time I came across the clearing, it was late afternoon. The sky above had begun to dim, as if the sunlight was reluctant to enter this part of the forest. The clearing itself felt oddly empty, like it had been abandoned for years. The ground was soft and spongy beneath my boots, and I could see faint tracks. Something heavy had passed through here not too long ago. I crouched down to inspect them, but the more I looked, the more uneasy I became. They weren't animal tracks. They were too large, too spread apart, and not like any creature I recognized. I backed away slowly, the sense of dread in my chest growing heavier. Something was wrong, and I knew it. I didn't know what, but I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but it was already too late. I turned to head back, but as I retraced my steps, the forest felt different. It didn't look the same. The trees seemed taller now, and the undergrowth thicker. I could swear I hadn't passed that rock earlier or that fallen log. The sense of being watched returned, more intense this time, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few steps. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling gnawed at me. Every rustling leaf felt like a warning, every snap of a twig like a footstep. Hours passed, and I still hadn't found my way back to the trail. The sky had darkened fully, and the woods around me had grown thick and suffocating. The moon barely pierced the canopy, and I was left to navigate by the faintest of glimmers. I was lost. That's when I heard it. A soft, distant sound. A crack like the breaking of a branch, but it was too deliberate, too calculated. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, my breaths coming quick and shallow. I stood there in the darkness, straining my ears, trying to place the sound. It came again, closer this time, though still faint. I had no idea what it was, but my gut told me it wasn't natural. It wasn't an animal. With a sense of cold panic, I started to move faster, pushing through the thick underbrush. But every step I took, the forest seemed to close in on me. It felt as if the trees were shifting, their branches reaching down to grab at me. I stumbled, nearly falling, but I forced myself to keep going. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stop. Then, just as the panic started to consume me, I heard the sound again, but this time it was louder, unmistakable. A crack of a branch, only it wasn't alone. There was a shuffle, then a rustle of leaves. Someone or something was behind me. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran, but it felt like forever. The forest was a blur, and the noise behind me never stopped. Every now and then, I would hear something close, a breath, the shuffle of feet through the underbrush. But whenever I turned around, there was nothing, just the empty trees, their branches swaying in the wind. Finally, just as I was about to collapse from exhaustion, I broke through the dense thicket and stumbled into a clearing. My heart was pounding in my chest, but there, in the center of the clearing, was the trail. Took everything in me to stay calm, but I did. I forced myself to walk, to not let the overwhelming sense of dread take over. I knew I had to get out, and the trail was my only way. Hours later, as dawn began to break over the horizon, I emerged from the woods, completely exhausted but alive. The sun's first rays felt warm on my face, and I breathed deeply, trying to shake off the fear that still gripped my chest. I made my way back to my car, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the quiet. I never returned to those woods. Something in them had changed that night, something I couldn't explain. The feeling of being watched, the rustling of leaves, the footsteps in the dark. Those things never left me. They stayed with me even after I left. And though I don't know what I encountered that night, I know one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it's still out there. I had always thought of myself as an experienced outdoorsman. I've been camping alone countless times, hiked up mountains, camped by lakes, and slept under the open sky without so much as a second thought. I knew the woods like the back of my hand, or so I thought. It all started a few days ago when I decided to venture out into a more remote area for a week-long solo camping trip. The place I chose was deep in the woods, miles away from any civilization. The terrain was rugged, untouched, the kind of place most people wouldn't bother going to. The map showed no major trails, only a few narrow, unmarked paths. Perfect, I thought. I wanted to escape. I wanted silence. The first day was uneventful, which was exactly what I wanted. I hiked for hours, set up camp near a small creek, and spent the evening by the fire, reading a book and watching the stars. Everything felt perfect. I remember looking up at the dark sky and thinking how lucky I was to be in such a peaceful place. The second day was when things began to feel off. I woke up early, the crisp morning air filling my lungs as I stretched. It was quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. I thought I might be overthinking it, so I went about my day as usual, gathering wood for the fire, washing up in the creek, and preparing for a day of hiking. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, but there was this unease in the air, a feeling that made my skin crawl. Maybe it was just the isolation. Maybe I was just getting too caught up in my own mind. But then, around mid-afternoon, I found something odd. I was walking along a narrow trail, one that was barely visible under the thick underbrush, when I noticed something strange. Footprints. They were fresh, the kind of prints that would have been left in the morning. But I was alone. I hadn't seen anyone since I set out, and there shouldn't have been anyone this deep in the woods. The prints were large, too large for a normal person, and they were spaced out as if whoever made them was walking fast, almost running. I knelt down and studied them, wondering if maybe some animal had made them, but they were too human in shape. My mind began to race. I stood up and looked around, but the forest was still as quiet as ever. I chalked it up to my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned back and continued on my way, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. By the time evening rolled around, I was back at camp, the fire crackling in front of me. But I didn't feel at ease. The quiet was now deafening. Even the sounds of the creek seemed muted. I couldn't explain it, but the woods felt different, darker. I wasn't alone. I knew it, but there was nothing I could do about it. I kept my knife close, just in case. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept waking up to the sound of twigs snapping outside my tent. But when I would listen carefully, everything would go silent again. I didn't dare check outside. I stayed in my sleeping bag, clutching the flashlight, and tried to convince myself it was just an animal. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I woke to the unmistakable feeling of dread. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, scanning the area. There was nothing out of the ordinary, but the silence was unnerving. Not even the birds were singing. I went about my usual routine, trying to ignore the growing sense of paranoia, but it was impossible to ignore the feeling that something was off. I kept my eyes open, always checking over my shoulder. The woods felt like they were closing in on me. I decided to spend the day exploring a different area, hoping the change of scenery would clear my mind. I packed a small bag with some water, snacks, and a map, then set out on foot, making my way through thick undergrowth. The trees seemed to grow denser as I moved deeper into the woods, their twisted roots and low-hanging branches making it difficult to navigate. But I was determined to press on. I stumbled upon a small clearing after several hours of hiking. It was a peaceful spot, a patch of grass surrounded by tall, imposing trees. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. I took a seat and opened my water bottle, taking a long drink. But just as I was about to settle in and enjoy the quiet, something caught my eye, a shape moving at the edge of the clearing. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, a man, standing just outside the edge of the trees, watching me. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but he was too far away, too hidden by the dense forest. I stood up, the panic rising in my throat, but the man didn't move. He just stood there, motionless. I took a step back, my mind racing. Should I confront him? Should I run? Couldn't decide. But before I could do anything, the man turned and disappeared into the trees, vanishing without a sound. I stood there, heart pounding, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to follow him, to figure out who he was and what he was doing out here. But another part of me screamed to turn around and go back to camp, to leave the woods and never look back. I didn't follow him, couldn't. Instead, I quickly made my way back to camp, my mind spinning with fear. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain that someone was following me. But when I reached my campsite, everything seemed normal. Too normal. The fire had burned down to embers, the tent was still standing, and the food I had left out was untouched. Nothing was out of place, but I didn't feel safe. I spent the rest of the day packing up my things, my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. By dusk, I had decided to leave the area altogether. I didn't care how far I had come. I couldn't stay another night in those woods. I started packing up my gear, ready to head back to civilization. But as I was zipping up my tent, I heard something behind me, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not the quiet shuffle of animals, but the deliberate tread of boots. Heavy boots. I spun around, but there was no one there. I grabbed my pack, my hands shaking, and ran toward the trail. I didn't look back, didn't care if I made noise or attracted attention. I just wanted out. I hiked through the night, my body aching, my mind racing. Every few minutes, I thought I heard someone behind me. The sound of footsteps, always too far away to confirm, but close enough to make my heart race. I pushed on, determined to reach the trailhead. By the time I stumbled back to the main road, I was exhausted, covered in sweat and dirt, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't being followed. I wasn't being watched. I finally reached the parking lot where my car was parked. The familiar sight of the vehicle was a comfort. I got in, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were still shaking as I started the engine. As I drove away, the woods behind me began to shrink into the distance. I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing on the side of the road, watching me drive away. But there was nothing. I made it home the next day, and I haven't been back to those woods since. The whole experience still haunts me. The silence, the footsteps, the man who watched me from the trees. I'll never understand what happened out there. But one thing is certain, the woods don't forget, and neither do I. I spent most of my life hiking and camping. I'm not some adrenaline junkie or mountain climber. I just like being outside, alone, away from the noise. Over the years, I've gotten used to the sounds of the forest, the patterns of weather, and how trails shift over time. I've had close calls before. Bad storms, twisted ankles, even a run-in with a black bear. But nothing that ever scared me too bad. Nothing like what happened last fall. It started as a week-long solo trip into a stretch of woods I hadn't explored much before. There's this state forest about 3 hours north of where I live. Not many people go there, especially in October. The weather was already turning cold, and the trees were almost bare. I figured it would be peaceful. Just me, my gear, and the sound of dry leaves underfoot. I parked at a tiny dirt pull-off near the southern trailhead. It wasn't an official campsite, just a patch of gravel next to a rusted metal signpost. From there, I planned to hike about 10 miles north over a couple days, following a mix of marked trails and old logging roads. I had my GPS, a detailed topo map, and enough food and supplies to last at least 10 days. I wasn't worried about getting lost. I've always been careful. The first 2 days were uneventful, cold, quiet, and honestly kind of beautiful. During the day, the sun filtered through the thin canopy, turning everything gold and orange. At night, the temperatures dropped fast, but I had a good sleeping bag and dry firewood. The forest was totally still, no animals rustling around, no wind, just a quiet kind of stillness that most people would find eerie. But I liked it. That kind of silence lets your thoughts settle. On the third morning, I left camp around 7:30. The plan was to follow a ridge line that ran northwest. I'd marked it on the map the night before. It looked like an old, mostly flat trail that would lead me through a denser part of the forest. According to the map, it eventually curved back to the main trail about 6 miles north. I figured it would take most of the day, maybe a bit longer with the elevation. The ridge started out just like I expected. A narrow path, barely visible, lined with old rocks and covered in dry leaves. Every now and then I'd see the remains of cut logs, old stumps from when this was probably used for logging decades ago. I felt good, like I was finally in a place few people bothered to go. But a couple hours in, things started to feel off. At first, it was subtle. The slope got a little steeper than I expected. The trees got denser too. Less light made it through, and the trail became harder to follow. I double-checked my GPS. It said I was on the right track, but something about the terrain didn't match the map. According to the topo, I should have been walking a fairly level ridge. But now I was climbing. I stopped to rest and pulled out the map again. The ridge line was clearly marked as a gentle incline, not the steep grade I was now dealing with. I figured maybe I'd veered slightly off course. I took a few readings, realigned myself, and tried cutting back west to reconnect with what should have been the proper trail. Except, the forest didn't let up. No matter which direction I went, the slope kept going up. Not steep enough to be a mountain or anything, just an endless uphill grade that shouldn't have been there. And the weirdest part? The sound changed. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the usual forest noise, occasional birds, wind, distant creaks of trees was just gone. It was dead silent, like the woods were holding their breath. I kept hiking. Hours passed. I stopped twice to eat and rest, but I was sweating hard and my legs were getting sore from the climb. My GPS kept showing me moving in the right direction, but the landscape said otherwise. I should have hit a stream by now, or at least a break in the trees. But it was all the same dark, thick woods, and an unrelenting incline. By late afternoon, I was starting to panic a little. I wasn't lost, not technically, but I couldn't explain why the terrain didn't match anything on the map. I decided to set up camp right there and get some rest. Maybe with fresh light, I'd spot a landmark and reorient myself. That night was rough. It got colder than I expected, and the ground was sloped awkwardly, making sleep hard. But worse than that was the silence. I know I've said that I'm used to quiet in the woods, but this was different. This wasn't peace. This was like being buried in cotton. No wind, no cracking branches, no animals. Just a kind of pressure in the air that made me feel watched. I barely slept. By morning, I'd made up my mind to backtrack. I'd follow my GPS breadcrumbs and retrace my steps to the base of the ridge. Simple plan, but it didn't work. I started back the way I came, following the exact route, but the terrain kept changing. Hills that weren't there yesterday, dead trees I didn't recognize, paths that didn't match my previous steps. I kept walking, convinced I'd find the stump I'd rested at the day before, or that small clearing with the fallen pine tree. But none of it was there. I was sweating again, not from exertion but from panic. The ridge wasn't a ridge anymore. It was a maze. No matter how far I walked, it all looked the same. I even passed a stretch of forest where I swear every tree had the same twisted knot in its trunk. Like copies. I stopped again, not because I was tired, but because I was afraid I'd walk in circles until nightfall. I checked the GPS again. The device showed me moving normally. Coordinates changed as they should, but it was lying. Either that or the forest didn't follow any logic. By the 5th day, I was starting to unravel. I'd burned through more food and water than I should have. I tried rationing, but hiking for hours every day burns calories fast. I filtered what water I could from a tiny, muddy trickle I found downhill, but even that vanished after half a mile. It was like the forest let me have just enough to keep me going, then closed back in. My compass started acting up on the 6th day. It would swing erratically, spinning sometimes, then locking in one direction no matter how I turned. I threw it in frustration. That's when I realized I hadn't seen the sun in almost 2 days. The sky above the canopy was gray, sure, but it wasn't cloud cover. It was like a film, like the trees grew so thick and tall in that part of the forest that they blocked out everything. I stopped using my gear altogether after that. The tools weren't helping. I stopped trying to figure it out and just started moving, hour after hour, picking a direction and hoping it would lead to something different. But it never did. The ridge just kept going. I don't know how many days passed like that. Could have been 7. Could have been more. I ran out of food. I ate dry pine needles, the soft white inner bark of certain trees, stuff I remembered from survival books. I barely slept. My clothes got torn up from branches. My skin was scratched raw. I started mumbling to myself. Not full conversations, just short bursts to keep my brain moving. I say my name over and over. Say what day I thought it was. Describe the last real meal I ate, just to keep from slipping. Then one morning, I woke up and the slope was gone. The ground under my body was flat. I looked up and saw light, real sunlight, coming through the trees. The air smelled different too, fresher, not so damp and still. I stood up slowly, dizzy, barely able to keep my balance. I walked in the direction of the light, every part of me aching, hungry, and cold. And I found a trail, a real trail, wide, clear, with visible boot prints, a plastic trail marker nailed to a tree. I dropped to my knees and cried. I wasn't saved yet, but I knew this meant people had been here. That meant direction. That meant out. Took me another day to find a ranger station. When I stumbled into the clearing, I must have looked half dead. The ranger who found me said I looked like I'd been in the woods for 2 weeks, but I'd only been out there 10 days by my count. I was 30 pounds lighter, filthy, dehydrated, and exhausted. They asked me where I'd been, and I told them, showed them the ridge I'd marked on my map. The ranger frowned and said there was no ridge where I pointed. That entire section of the forest was supposed to be flat, surveyed decades ago. No incline, no old trails, no logging history. I didn't argue. I just nodded and took the ride back to town. I've never gone hiking alone since then. I still look at the map sometimes, trying to find that stretch of forest, trying to find the ridge that shouldn't be there, but I never can. It's not on satellite, not in any topo. It's like the forest made it up just for me. And when it was done, it let me go. But I still think about it. Every time I close my eyes, that slope that never ended, that silence, that place where the world stopped making sense and never fully started again.